let's go ahead and get started. So Ryan, you'll see Ryan's wearing a UVA mask, which I think it's very on brand, which I love that. Ryan, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, your major at UVA, but also what you're doing now professionally. And you just got muted.
Just got muted. Sorry about that. So I am a class of 2017 graduate from the College of Arts and Sciences. I majored in bio. I got a BA in that, and then I also got a BA in global public health, and I got a minor in bioethics, and I also completed the pre-med track in the college. So from there, I started working at Accenture, and now I found myself at a startup called Appear, which is located out in Santa Clara, California.
Cool. Thank you so much, Ryan. So a lot of people on this call are curious about federal consulting. I think the big curiosity is consulting as an industry has so many different buckets that it sort of supports, and federal is just one of them. So could you speak a little bit to what federal consulting is, what it's like consulting at a federal type practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would largely break federal consulting into two different primary highest level buckets. One of those is the traditional consulting model that I think generally people know in professional services. Like you go in, enter a situation, understand the dynamic and what you're trying to do, and then you typically have a fast turnaround on that task and deliver that to your client. So that's the traditional model, largely indifferent from non-federal consulting. The other bucket is more in the lines with contract-esque work, where you're actually a key administrator or a key implementer for government functions. So a lot of the work that comes through to private companies is based out of legislation. So legislation that is newly passed through Congress and signed by the executive branch. It goes off to various departments. So my experience was with Health and Human Services. So they were tasked with implementing a giant legislative package, and they did not have the capacity to really do that themselves. So in order to meet deadlines that are mandated by law, you have to reach out to organizations, companies that already have the personnel or the infrastructure established. And that's kind of where companies like Accenture, Deloitte, EY, and very niche, smaller contracting or consulting firms fit in. In that light, naturally with legislation, you're really going to be doing work indefinitely, or rather the work will exist indefinitely. And as a result, you could have a kind of hybrid where, and this is my experience, is like you have a hybrid where you technically are a contractor and you're implementing, but at the same time, you bring in that professional services nuance to it, and you could find yourself doing so many different things within a short period of time that it feels like you're turning through, that you're going through that traditional model of consulting, but you're still like technically on the same project.
Yeah, that's super helpful, and I think super helpful context to what those different buckets to be aware of. I think students in general are curious about how are these consulting firms sort of set up? How do I know if a role is federal consulting or not? Out of curiosity, Ryan, in terms of how it's structured, like how projects are structured and how the organization is structured, could you speak a little bit to sort of how you started off at Accenture and kind of moved around a little bit and how the structure hierarchy works there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll say when I decided to apply to consulting companies in the fall of my fourth year, I largely didn't know what the end outcome would look like. And coming from a science background and very much like on the research side of things, on the functional side of things, not having a technical background, my initial impulse was to apply to management consulting. And I think by and large that's the normal mindset is if I don't have technical skills or I don't have like digital, if I'm not like profoundly like situated in the digital space, it's like, okay, let me just default to management consulting. So that was my initial nuance. But at the same time, when I was going through the interview process, I don't feel Accenture like for all of the roles that they had in management consulting, all the roles that they had in technology, I don't think they necessarily were like, to apply to technology, you need to be a coder or you need to be a software engineer. So when that was my first contact with the company, and I immediately realized it was a little bit more open-ended than kind of like rigid cutoff lines with skill sets. So actually, by the end, when I did receive an offer from Accenture, they extended me a technology offer, and they were just like, we enjoyed you in your interviews. We need people with soft skills in the technology practice. That doesn't go away just because you're in a technology space. So they were like, we understand it's going to be a learning for you, but that's just natural. We're like Accenture, and I think larger companies as a whole are ready to do that kind of educational runway for new hires. So at a cultural level, it was really well situated for me to have that flexibility. And I accepted that role. I started at a technology project in August of 2017, and I stayed on that technology project for 3 years. So it really carried forward for a long time. Again, reflecting on my last answer, like my role and responsibilities changed many different times, and maybe what I was working on was different year to year, but it was the same project, and it was a good experience. So.
Awesome. That's super helpful. And I think super helpful context as students are thinking about what to apply to and sort of how to know what to apply to. I think that's always a big challenge that's out there too. So in terms of what you find most exciting about consulting as an industry overall, what do you like most about it? What do you find most exciting or invigorating about the roles that you've been in?
Yeah. So, I mean, to that, it really touching on what I kind of mentioned before, it gives you flexibility. And coming out of college, I knew, so I guess more context is coming from a different background, a non-tech background, and more of a science background. It was kind of, for me, it was trying something new, and I was ready to learn. I was wanting to learn. I wanted my first job out of college to really put me in the mix of new things, as opposed to like being in an environment that I maybe had at UVA or maybe had an internship in the summer. So that was my expectation, and Accenture was accommodating. They were just they after the interview process, they were comfortable with it. And then joining a company like Accenture, it really gives you, like, I think, in joining a company like Accenture and joining in the technology practice really gives you a very quick window of how much opportunity there is. And I don't think I would have had that at a smaller consulting company, while feeling that my job was extremely fulfilling, and while having kind of the professional mobility that I did when I was working for Accenture. So those were really big pros in my mind. And consulting, I think consulting at in its purest form really lets the individual drive. It's not a situation where your manager will be like, I need you to do this and do it this way, and I just need you to do these steps, provide that. There is so much more ambiguity around that, but for me, I find beauty in that ambiguity. I find a lot of freedom and liberation in that. So going to work was hard, still hard. It never changes to be easy, but I could make it what I wanted to make it.
Yeah, that's super helpful, Ryan. Thank you for sharing that too. So I guess in thinking about how work in the federal side is different than maybe the more commercial side, so Accenture having federal and commercial sides of things, how does it differ? You mentioned before the timelines of things and the regulations and federal things, but is there any other differentiation that you would be able to think through or provide for students of sort of how that work might differ?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing is the point of it all. So coming from working on something that originates out of legislation, there's an innate public good that supposedly come out of it, that it's, for whatever reason, one way or another, that's why the legislation passed Congress and became law. So that argument, which I think a lot of people can make in any kind of career, it's like that, as opposed to making it yourself, it's kind of given to you and been like, we passed this law because of this public service reason. And so that argument is really answered for you right from the start. When I joined on the technology role that I was in, I didn't have to build a bridge in my mind for saying like, oh, this will be fulfilling or this will not be fulfilling. It was really easy for me to kind of just be like, oh yeah, like we're doing government work here. It's going to be fulfilling because I care about society at large. I care about people's lives improving, and I care about the government being able to do their work and carry out their mandates effectively. So that is exceptional. I think in the traditional commercial practices, you'll see when you step into a space, you'll be able to see like the business argument for it really fast, whether it's a financial cost or a labor cost or whatever that you're trying to mitigate or smooth over. That will be really clear to you from the beginning. But, and I'm not to say that the work I'm about to mention here is exclusive to the commercial practice, but like, I think coordinating, as an example, like internal corporate functions, like HR management systems, it's like managing your workforce. That is critical for any kind of large institution, like government or commercial or private sector. So that work exists in both sides, but you'll kind of be doing that work in that vein more so on the commercial practice. But there's also cons to being in the federal bucket. So like you won't be able to work on consumer products really. You could deal with processes that like approve for safety or approve for quality assurance kind of for those products. But at the same time, you're not going to be like designing the interior of a storefront or like or designing logos or doing digital marketing campaigns. So it is give and take, and largely like you should let your personal passions drive the decision. Like if you're getting into federal space, don't expect to kind of like working on like designing kind of the McDonald's like digital menu screens, you know? So
That's a good pulse to have, I think, and be kind of aware of what that would look like too. So that's super helpful. You mentioned at the beginning, we were talking about your role and how you came from the college and your liberal arts background. Could you speak a little bit to how you think a liberal arts background serves well to a career in consulting?
yeah, so I think when I decided to attend college, just from the start of it all, I didn't have kind of that liberal arts value in my mind. And when like I was science, I was pre-med from the start, and that's kind of where I saw my finish line being. So when I was going through undergraduate, I was really trying to find my niche and find kind of where I was to reside for the significant or like overwhelming predominant portion of my career. And when I came to UVA, I quickly realized that the community was a key component to my experience. And also to mention is I was a transfer student, so I came from the University of Pittsburgh after 1 year there. And coming from there, from another 4-year science-oriented or research-oriented institution with a large health system there, it's like I could compare and contrast the experiences pretty directly. And UVA was much more on the liberal arts side of things. They definitely encouraged like experience diversification, stepping out of your comfort zone, being able to work independently for what you want to do, not necessarily following a curriculum or a rubric for your 4 years. So I think that was a really good wake-up call because it got my mind thinking outside of a structure. And I think that only goes to serve you so well after you're outside of academia. Like life is not a structure. It's really something that you make of it. And if you feel lost in that kind of space, that can have dramatic repercussions, not only just in the silos of your professional life, but just your life at large. So consulting, mentioning on freedom and liberation and talking and feeling like you're in a very fluid professional workspace, you have that sense of ambiguity, and you need to be able to thrive in that sense of ambiguity. No one is going to either know what to tell you, or no one's going to be able to have the time to tell you what to do. So it's on you in every sense of that. The success, putting yourself out there, meeting new people. That was a big transformation for me coming from UVA. It was being in a space where if you don't talk to people and you don't learn what else is happening around you, then you really have siloed yourself and restricted your professional growth and development. So I think UVA really does a good job of at least putting the environment and the ecosystem for that to cultivate as a student experience. And I think not only like whether it's a good thing or bad thing of the traditional perception of a culture of competitiveness and a culture of really trying to succeed, very, very much so. As a result of that, a lot of people try so many different kinds of things. So even if you're a bio major and you're talking to another bio major, you're likely going to like realize that other bio major isn't only doing bio stuff. You know, they have their background will be a lot more dynamic, and you should capitalize on that. Like be comfortable being uncomfortable.
I think that was incredible advice, and I almost wish I could just end it right now. But I won't, because we have a couple more questions. Ryan, you spoke a little bit in that response to the importance of connections, being in professional world. Can you speak a little bit to where students are right now, the importance of networking and engaging with alumni or employers? How important is networking for a field like consulting?
It's critical. So I mean, networking, it's not the only factor, right? Like if you don't feel comfortable in a networking environment, then that's one thing. But I would say that my perception of what networking is really transformed like actively once I started going through the interview process with Accenture and consulting. So I think a lot of people think that networking is just getting names and putting your face in front of someone and like talking about like, oh, what's your day to day or what's that? But it's hard to do that from the student like on grounds interview or just like interviewing cycle when you're a student. But the important thing is to recognize that once you do graduate and once you do enter the workforce, networking is no longer just going into info sessions and making sure you know the recruiter or making sure that you have a preset number of questions that you ask to the volunteers that you're working with. So networking is by and large just being friendly with people, like being open to conversations to learn more about them and about what their work entails. And while the value of that may not be immediately realized, life is very long. So careers are very long. There, like over the course of 3 years, there were definitely moments where I met people and you just be friendly and you remember them and you remember what they do. And a year, 2 years later down the road, it's like, oh, we need that for what I'm doing now. Oh, I know someone, like, let me go loop them in. Like, let me pull them into the room. And then you're the hero. I mean, like whether that's, like naturally, I'm sure everyone will get to a solution at one point or another, but if you're the person that is like, listen, we're not going to sit here and talk for 2 hours. I know the person who can do it right now because I'm friends with them at this point. You pull them in the room, you get the job done faster. And people take note of that. So it can definitely help you accelerate a little bit faster than other folks in like promotion cycles, in being familiar with leadership executives and building trust with your management, which I think is priceless. Like you can't substitute the freedom that trust brings. And it really is and like I'm talking about the dynamic of consulting being liberating, but a deeper layer of that is having people trust you and building a reputation that is trustworthy. So it is instrumental. And it's, like I said, it's important to make sure you don't lock yourself in a box for what networking is.
No, I love that. And if students are ever concerned with alumni not being like approachable or around, Ryan has had car trouble and is sitting in a dealership getting his car fixed, and he's still here to help you and to talk through it. So I want to provide context for you all too of why he's wearing a mask and why he's in a space that's not super quiet. That's why he's still here.
Oh, yeah.
He's still here and he's still happy to help. So remember, alum are here to help. That's what they're here to do. And I think we're learning a ton from Ryan in 25 minutes already, which is great. So again, Ryan, thank you for doing this in a time where it's probably not the ideal environment for you. So in terms of challenges, what do you think are some challenges you'd say that you confront in the federal space maybe you wouldn't have otherwise, or can you speak to that within the consulting space?
Yeah. So maybe not so much I think like on the theme of being put into an uncomfortable situation, one that you know you're gonna have to learn something new. There's naturally a challenge with that. You're not only like learning the facts of what is new to you, you're also learning the dynamic of how people already situated in that space work and how they think and how they communicate. So that was a big hurdle for me working on a technology project, was working with developers and working with folks who on the Accenture side knew the technology front and back, and on the client side had no idea what was happening at a technology level. So where I kind of fit in the mix of things, and it wasn't necessarily designed this way, but how I like realized was the best way to get things done, and which is also a struggle. Like you have to be able to adapt and be receptive to your environment to know where you fit in best. But when I realized that, I was like, okay, well, the tech people can talk tech and the functional people can't talk tech, but the functional people are paying us. So we need to be able to communicate what we're doing at a technology level in the context of how non-tech people think. So I kind of like was able to do that because I didn't have a technology background myself. But like it was learning. It was kind of like being very empathetic on both sides of it, understanding that the way I think is not the way everyone should think. Active listening, engagement, continuing conversations, and tracking and being responsible all carry forward to a positive customer relationship and a positive internal team relationship. So that's hard to do. It's not going to sugarcoat and be like, oh, I was just a master of it. That's why I joined consulting. That's not true. Like I learned that that's where I fit best. And you have to do that for your own self. So that's really hard. And I would say like in federal, because you are working with the same people over a very long period of time, relative to the traditional model of consulting, you need to be able to build that. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. That's super helpful. In thinking about your time at UVA, Ryan, skills you developed that were really helpful, what are some skills you think that you were able to gain from UVA that maybe helped transfer to your professional work as a consultant?
Yeah, so critical thinking is something I'm realizing that is ever more valuable and exceptional, really. So being able to not act impulsively, and I say that not only like in conversations with other people, like if you disagree with someone, then you just like click to disagree with them. Also catching yourself in your chain of thought, like if you feel that you know the best answer because of that's just how you've always done it, you need to catch yourself in that moment and say, that's not what consulting is. Like, I can't just do what I know and think that's the right thing to do. I need to listen to my customer. I need to listen to what their needs are. I need to listen to what from the technical team, or I need to know what our capabilities are. And really solidify those in your own mind before you reach that conclusion. And once you do reach that conclusion, you need to be able to communicate. So at UVA, I was part of a lot of different student groups, and my communication was a lot different then. So it was something that definitely developed after a lot of practice and experience working with my clients, getting feedback from others for saying like, how I wrote something up wasn't clear or was clear or was maybe missing the point or losing the focus of what we're trying to accomplish. And on that note, it's important to realize that every action you have has value or potentially could have value, and you want to make sure to maximize that. People, I think just in business and not only business, just in life in general, it's like once you are tasked with doing something, it's show me what we need to do, tell me how we need to do it, or how long it'll take or whatever, and let's get it done. It's not let's sit around this week and like let's go through a huge ideation project and let that take up 6 months of effort. Like you need to be able to produce results really fast. and not only just like results generally, like you need to ensure that those results have value and make sure that they're meaningful. So again, not an easy thing. If you guys are curious, there's a workflow process called Agile, which is really prominent in just life, in corporate functions and working in general. So Agile is really something to learn. I was fortunate that Accenture made that a training priority. So I had 2 weeks of that business process training. It's like Agile is the methodology, and then there's also one called Lean Six Sigma, which is just another operational efficiency and effectiveness kind of work process. So those are, if you're trying to like put more meat behind what I'm telling you, I would say look into those.
Yeah, that's great advice. And students telling, let's look into those. So in terms of, so COVID obviously is this thing that's currently happened and affected a lot of people and their internships and their ability to gain sort of really practical experience over the summer. And many students are sort of still looking at like, okay, what do I do to maximize my time? What advice, Ryan, do you have for people, what they can be doing right now if maybe their internship was canceled, to kind of develop some of these skills that you talked about as being really important for consulting?
Yeah, make value with time. Make value with time. So never find yourself in a situation where you are doing nothing, and never sell yourself short of finding an experience that really does build on your skill set. It's, I think, something that I always hold true, and something that is tragic in my mind is when, like, not only like my peers in my class or alumni before me, but when students presently graduate UVA, they have a 4-year degree under their belt and they are ready to work. And unfortunately for them, one reason or another, nothing worked out, and they're forced to essentially like get a serving job or get some like service sector job. And I think that's the worst outcome that could possibly happen. And alumni, we should do as much as we can to prevent that from happening. Like, that's not why you guys went to college, right? Like, you didn't go to college to get a service job after graduating. So you guys are definitely worth more than that. And whether it is a hard road, and it's not a given thing, but being able to adapt if you are in that situation will exemplify a lot of initiative and a lot of responsibility and ownership that you have over your own life. And I'm not saying don't avoid doing a job if you need the money. Like, if you need the money, then you need to survive, like, no question about it. But when it comes down to showcasing what you did to future employers in your next interview, don't say that you spent a year doing, like, being a server. Like, be sure that you have something that you're doing in parallel, whether it's taking classes or doing volunteer work or doing unpaid internships. Like, really whatever you can do to exemplify professional drive, that will go a long way. It's so, like, that's really important to do. I can't understate that. So yeah.
That was awesome. Thank you. I think that's a really great point. And again, I think leans to on the importance of alumni are here to help and happy to do that. So, but asking them for assistance, getting advice on their trajectory, those things are, I think, hugely helpful to help yours sort of take more form, right? And learning more about that. Students, I only have a couple more questions to go. So if you have additional questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. Ryan, something we always hear a lot of fear about is that dreaded case interview in the consulting recruitment process. Do you have any advice on how the case might differ on the federal side of things, or just in general, how to get ready for that case interview in the recruitment process?
Yeah, so I would say that largely the case interview dynamic is very similar across commercial and federal. The situation, the context remains the same. You're in a room with an interviewer for 30 to 60 minutes, and you need to answer a question. Like, that dynamic doesn't change. So I think preparation for it doesn't need to change either. I think a lot of people do get bogged down in the details of cases, and they're like, I need to study the different models of case studies extensively, or like, buying case in point is one example of doing that. And I think that largely misses the point of what you should be doing in preparation for case studies. Like, I am adamantly opposed to buying case in point. Like, it's a waste of time. You don't need that. You don't need to invest yourself into a book. What you do need to do is talk to people who are consultants, whether that's fellow students who've done internships or alumni who are in that sector, or recruiters if you're doing the active interview cycle, and ask them the questions of like, what do I need to do to prepare for this case study? And my response is practice. You cannot replace a good response without practice. Yeah. So my methodology, didn't buy case in point. I asked my roommate, who I was lucky to have, as he had done a consulting internship and was already planning to be a full-time consultant. So I was like, hey, like, I found these questions online. Are they appropriate? Like, are they actually real for case interviews? The answer is yes. There's tons of resources for free online. You can easily get case study questions by a simple Google search, and sit down and practice with someone who knows how to do it. Find that person, and whether that's LinkedIn, whether that's asking friends, like, just find someone. I think I did like 3 to 5 practice sessions between 2 people, and that really did what it had to do. And what it has to do is build your confidence. It has to build your level of comfort being in a situation, answering a case study question. The dynamic of a case study question is role play. Like, the interviewer is your customer and you are the consultant. So you need to get into the mindset of being customer service oriented and being clear and concise, and being able to run them through rationally how you found your answer. There's definitely a lot of like formulas and or like, not a lot, but like a good number of formulas and models that can guide your thinking. Accenture provides, and other large consulting companies might do it as well. It's like they provide kind of a handbook that is super easy and to digest. It's like 30 pages on a PDF file that you flow through in 30 minutes. It's really fast. But you can reference that backwards when you are like practicing and preparing for case study questions, by saying like, oh, like, the wording in here indicates a cost benefit analysis. So let me pull up like basic cost benefit function and apply that here. So there is legwork to do. It's just not as extensive as like studying for an exam. And I think 90% of the battle is being comfortable and confident when you are presenting it with your interviewer.
Yeah, and it sounds like practice too, which I'm glad that you mentioned that, because we always try to reiterate that too. The more practice you can get, the more confident you're going to become with these types of questions. So that's wonderful to hear, and it sounds like a great way to kind of get yourself going. So a lot of times students will ask me this question of like, okay, well, you start as a consultant and your career trajectory changes. Talk a little bit about that. I guess sort of like what do consultants typically do next, and you've made a move, which is wonderful, but
Yeah.
just about how that sort of works and what that might look like.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when you're in consulting, labor churn is normal. Like, people come and go frequently. You're in a professional services sector, and especially in the DC area, like in federal, a lot of the work is contract based. So say one company gets a contract from another company, you'll see a labor shift of workers from that project to that new company, and they'll keep doing the same work. That flow is largely driven through like social networks and professional networks that you build on your project. But that kind of so there's that one. I think that's the standard like baseline. Like, if you want to stay in consulting but you can easily work for different companies, the path is there. Another topic is people who end up realizing that consulting isn't for them. They always talk about going to industry and finding like a field or a specific company that owns a product or carries out a service directly, and they're like, I want to work that. I want to manage that. I want to make sure that this product or this service or this company succeeds. Or the other side is like, I know that, like, I'm super fascinated by like the airline industry, so let me just get a corporate job at an airline company. That's very easy and rational flow as well. And the other option, which is what I did, was kind of in the startup space, but I realized that I did enjoy working in the tech sector. So like technology is now what I'm kind of making my career. And Accenture helped me realize that. Working on a consulting project helped me realize that. But like, I don't know this product, but I just know how to lift an operation off the ground from my experience. And I'm rather than using like my experience in an industry or with a company or on this one kind of technology, I'm using the skill set acquired, and I have a general interest in technology, but I'm using my skill set of like operational management to reach out to startups, and this one kind of worked its way through. So different layers that you can kind of take it, but the benefit of that is it's really dynamic.
Yeah, and you learn so much too. I think that's a big theme we hear is within consulting, you learn so much. It's a big learning curve, but
Yeah.
it's the ability to really gain a really incredible skill set that's really transferable across different industries too. So this is my last question. So if you've got questions for Ryan, please pop in that chat. I'm watching it. Nothing's coming in yet though. Ryan, you mentioned Agile and you mentioned Lean Six Sigma as things that students can be learning. Any other resources or maybe like blogs or newsletters that you recommend that students can be digging into to kind of get ready for recruitment or just learning more about consulting and federal consulting overall?
Yeah. Consulting specifically. So I'm more so of a proponent of, and I think consulting as a practice allows you to do it. Like we talked about how kind of you're in charge of your trajectory and path. So understanding kind of personally who you are, doing constant reflection is really important to kind of make sure that you're happy with the paths that are in front of you. It'll make decision making for yourself a lot easier, and it'll make you just generally more confident in where you are professionally, which is again another problem that I think just people early on in their careers always typically have. But so I would say like the things that I do are like the things that drive me to technology aren't necessarily like technology podcasts, I guess. Like it's really captivating on the energy and the spirit that people have to bring change, like meaningful change to all parts of the world. And we're in a very technology transitional period from of like either converting like the legacy technology systems that were first implemented to like new like cloud-based services, but also bringing like non-tech spaces into a technology like creating a technology space around them. So my startup right now, like our product entirely is based on frontline like technician workers, which they're not computer jobs, you know, like those are people who are working on an engine, who are working on turbine, who are understanding like manufacturing workflows and stuff like that. And those folks just like haven't had the same kind of attention that that white collar workers have. So as a database manager at Accenture, I didn't have a problem of not having a technology solution in front of me. Like there was undoubtedly a solution for everything I needed to do. As a frontline worker, you don't have that. Like the question is, like this problem exists now, but it existed 100 years ago in the same way. But the reason I joined my startup is because that concept of changing that into a technology space is what excites me. And I realized that by like looking at like very personal blogs. One of them is called Too Wordy, and she's a writer for a technology or a financial, is it Crunchbase or something? I think it's something like that. But she's a writer for there, but she has her own personal blog, and it's like really diving into why she personally feels that the work is fulfilling. It's not necessarily about the technology; it's about her life and how kind of work fits into that. So I recommend if like I have that kind of perspective when you're looking at things, more so in the vein of just like being empathetic, like. Don't listen. I encourage you to like have a very comprehensive full picture view of the work you're doing. So understand like your audience, your customers, your users, and dive into who those people are. So, I mean, it seems unconventional, but like if you're in a space where you're a racial minority, like being like my startup has we work with manufacturers that are based in Mexico, you know, like in that kind of context, I'm a racial minority, and it's important for me to realize like who the individuals I'm working with, like who they are and where they're coming from. But I'm genuinely interested in that. It's not, I very highly encourage you to not have like a scientific like perspective of like, I need to study who these people are and then be a social manipulator. It's not about that. It's being empathetic and being dismissive or not being dismissive, active learning, active listening. Some podcasts that just generally do that. I think there are a lot of the ones like 1619 by the New York Times is a really good one for like the Black American experience. A lot of those kind of podcasts didn't have the attention or didn't have like the funding that they do now, largely in the wake of everything that's happening in this country. It's like a consequence of that is everyone's talking about it, and it's up to us to listen. So if you're not listening, you're not really like you're really you're locking your feet to where you are now, and you're not going to grow. So I think like I can maybe find a more comprehensive list and of what I like am running through on a daily basis. If you're looking for a news cycle, try to find. I know everyone already knows it, but like try to find an unbiased one. So BBC is really good for an independent view of outside into America. The world is ever more globalized, so you're only going to be interacting with people abroad ever more and more. And another one, like NPR, if we're looking for a domestic news source, like there is a tint of liberal bias in there, but like I'm sure everyone here can kind of dissect that and take out the facts as they need to. But NPR is publicly funded, like there's and like donation-based funding as well. There's hopefully, as I know it, there's no like funding campaign behind it or like agenda, political or otherwise, behind NPR. You know, like so be smart and intentful about everything you take into you. If you just let the world tell you what to listen to, you're gonna go insane. So.
That was hugely helpful, Ryan. Thank you for all those resources, and students. I'll try and pull that stuff out and put it in the follow-up email that he shared too, because there's a lot of little nuggets in that response. So thank you, Ryan. We do have a couple of questions that have come into the chat that I'll pose. So the first one is, can you speak to how much flexibility there is once you get a job at a consulting company for what types of projects you're placed on?
Yeah, so I think it varies largely on the company that you end up working for. So Accenture does a really good job with that from my perspective. Like they allowed me to choose. So I guess let me break it down and take a step back further. So at Accenture, it's like you get the job at Accenture, but when they hire you, they have no idea what you're actually going to be working on. Essentially, they just have a labor quota for every calendar year. They're like, we need 100 analysts in the DC area next year. Like, cool, like let's get 20 from UVA, let's get 10 from VC, blah, 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 blah. Like work all that. But they don't say, they're just forecasting. They're just like, this is how contracts are flowing in. This is what we expect to be necessary to fulfill our labor obligations and for us to succeed. Once you start working at Accenture, you have to, and like you do your training, you get onboarded or whatever, and it's not like you're alone on an island, but you have to apply to projects again. So that's when, like after you've joined the company, that's when you know what actually you could be doing on a day-to-day basis. It's stressful. Like I had the mentality when I joined Accenture, I was like, I'm ready to work. Like get me behind a desk, like put me in front of a customer, whatever it takes. Like I'm ready to work. But it's important to slow down and not feel rushed, because if you're not happy on your first project, that could really ruin your entire experience with consulting or with your company. And it's important to make it right for you. At other companies, I'm actually really not familiar. So like EY, Deloitte, like other large consulting companies, I'm fairly certain they might have, like, I'm sure it's just not like you're working here kind of thing. Like it's going to be a conversation to some extent, but really take a step back and be sure that the first thing you do in particular is the right thing that you want to do. I had a friend who didn't find his first project for like 6 months, I think. Like he was just constantly applying to things, and like he would keep his like career advisor, like we have career advisors and HR personnel who like make sure we're getting staffed accordingly. But they like, he was doing everything he should have been doing, but he just didn't get staffed until 6 months after his start date. So totally fine.
Yeah, but that's good. And it's good insight to know about how it works at Accenture. And I think good advice to students to sort of learn from different firms how it works at those individual firms that likely will be a little bit different. So that's helpful context.
Yeah.
The next question in here, I think that, go ahead, Ryan.
Just on that note, so like those would be really good questions and totally appropriate questions to ask during like interview, like networking events. It's like, instead of asking like, oh, what's your day to day, which I think is traditional, it's like, oh, like how do you get staffed on a project? Like, what is that process at your company?
Yeah, that's a great point and a great question. I think sometimes students are unsure of what to ask in those conversations too. And this one sort of leans into that a little bit. In terms of networking for recruitment purposes, any advice on how to build a relationship past the first informational interview phone call?
Yeah. Well, so I think in the background of your interviews, your strongest advocate is the recruiter. Like he or she is the one who is like really driving forward on everything happening from interviews to meeting setups to networking events. Like they know the messaging front, side, and out. Like, and they know what other consultants do front, side, and out. Like, but they're just so busy. It's like they're not going to, and it's not their responsibility or their role to kind of like lay that out for you. So in the background, like while you're going through all this, be sure you know the recruiter. Be friendly with the recruiter. Like don't just take them as a logistics person now. Like they are very much an active part of the recruiting process. The other thing is like if you do meet up with, like if you do meet people along the way, like worker volunteers who are just like at a networking event, like don't hesitate to reach back out to them if you reasonably have more questions to ask them. You know, like make sure you're getting the value. Make sure you know what you're stepping into. Those like flushing out those details for yourself will benefit you in the interview process, because like the people who are interviewing want to make sure you know what company you're applying to, you know what you're getting yourself into. Those were explicit questions in my final confirmation interview. They were like, well, do you really know what we do here? And that's the question, you know, like it's up to you to fill in that response. So be familiar with work, you know, like reach out to people on LinkedIn while you're actively doing that. And when you have that first interview over the phone or whatever, it's like, is this like, I would say like, that's not necessarily, that person that you meet there isn't necessarily like a networking experience. Like they're like, it's going to be social, it's going to be dynamic, it's going to be friendly and whatnot. But say like that's the end of the road for you in the interview process. It's not necessarily like, oh, I need to go back to that person. The person you probably go back to is the recruiter. Like people get jobs all the time from the recruiter making a decision, being like, hey, this person went through our entire interview cycle successfully, but they didn't get an offer. But a month later, that role could open up again, you know, for one reason or another, it could open up again. So that recruiter is the decision maker at that point in time. Like they're empowered because you were successful, but at the same time, it's an easy decision for the recruiter to make to give you that offer.
That's super helpful. I want to make sure we have time for Dreamless Questions. I think it's a really good one. How do you think code will impact recruitment at Accenture, and particularly the application process or interviewing? Any tips from your own experience of communicating effectively in a virtual setting?
Yeah, so to the first point, impact recruiting, in the federal space, it will be better insulated than other spaces. So if you're thinking about improving your odds of getting an offer and you're happy with federal, and like say you're on the line between commercial and federal, but you're happy with federal, like you know you would have a fulfilling experience doing that, I encourage you to do that. Like I think in my year alone, it's like we hired like 4 or 6 people for the commercial practice, but we hired like near 60 people in the federal practice. So there's just a labor difference. Like there's a higher demand in the federal space. And COVID is only going to exasperate that more. Like private companies aren't paying consultants as much as they used to. I think we went through a recent round of layoffs, unfortunately, like in the commercial side of things, like for people who just couldn't get staff on projects. You know, like they try their best, but the work just doesn't exist. So in federal, it's like legislation existing forever. The work will always stay there, you know, and that's the best part. There's going to be fluctuations, ebbs and flows for sure. But if we're looking for the more stable one, then that's it. Again, I like highly encourage you to let your personal passion drive that decision. Don't get into something you're not going to be happy with just to pay your bills. Like you won't be happy, you know. Interviews and process, like it's all going to be remote. So be comfortable. Be sure that you do the legwork to make sure your computer is set up right. Like you have secure internet connection. Like if there's ever a time to make sure that is good, it's during interviews for your jobs. Communicating effectively, people communicate very differently digitally than in person. Take things at a superficial value. Don't read beneath the lines. Don't get frustrated. But at the same time, be insistent. Like you're not in front of someone, so they're not going to feel like they need to do it right away. But if you need it right away, be like, I need, like, hey, like just following up here, blah, blah, blah. In an interviewing dynamic, it's kind of harder to pull the scenarios out. Like you're just kind of like going through the flow of things. But I would say if you have a recruiter who's saying like typing 2-word responses, 1-word responses to questions you're having, more indicative of their workload is probably super intense at the moment than them just being dismissive of you. So don't let it really like drag you down. I think we're all used to very in-person communication, and that was hard for me. Like I read off of people's facial expressions, their body language and all that. It's important to eventually have those like programmed perceptions or whatever in your mind and ready to go when you need them. But digitally, it's harder. On that note, if you can do video chatting as much as possible, like always be pro video chat. Like it's the best sense of normal we can really get at this point.
I love it. And I just want to see if we can try and get a last question that came in. Are there any class recommendations that you might have at UVA that you think would help prepare someone for a career in consulting?
Yeah, I think my recommendation is getting practical experience. So if you have I know there's like I did my bioethics minor, it's like there was a program, like a course that was about an internship. If you can really choose those and run with them, you're going to be in a very similar situation that as you would be after graduating and you're in the workforce. So independent, like any classes that give you kind of like independence, leadership, critical thinking skills, and I mean, like if you can learn new skills to expand your skill set, whether those are soft or hard technical skills, like do those. I did do a lot of, like I did 2 majors and a minor in pre-med. Like I think I blew the opportunity to take advantage of classes at UVA that were outside of my majors and minors, and I could just like take a one-off class learning development skills or something like that, you know, like it's like doing that at UVA as a student gives you a lot of structure that doesn't exist after you graduate. It's like people talk about like taking master classes all the time, and that's the best we can do. Like that's just like, it's good, but it's not the same as doing a semester with an instructor in front of you. So like if you can make an argument of why you as an individual should learn that, then I think that's good enough. But taking it forward, if you want to apply it to consulting, then look at the skills underneath that you would be acquiring from that class. So I would recommend my bioethics internship seminar. That's probably the best one I can do.
I love that. Well, Ryan, thank you so much. And we are right at time at 6, which is perfect. Thank you for taking the time, especially given your challenging day, to be here with us. We really appreciate it. Students, hope you enjoyed that. That was hugely helpful. I learned a lot myself. So Ryan, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Happy to help.
Yeah, thank you so much. And students, will see you later. And Ryan, hope the car stuff gets better. What's the situation now?